What is up, guys? Taiki here, and today I'm very honored to invite Ben Yorke to the podcast. How are you doing, Ben?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So can you just tell me, for the people that may or may not know you, like who you are, what do you do, and when and how did you get into crypto?
Okay, yeah, this is a very basic question, I guess, not the most exciting one. But if you're talking about me, like I think I graduated back in 2009 from the U.S. San Diego, actually. That's where I'm from, and that was like the financial crisis was kind of still in effect, and I was a business major, so at the time it wasn't like, hey, this is a great job market to jump in. So I got some crazy ideas to travel the world and kind of see what I wanted to do a little bit better. So eventually I gravitated towards China and then started, just living here, studying the language because that's obviously advantageous for, especially at the time, to be able to speak, Mandarin and stuff. And then through one thing or another, I think anyone who lives in China for an extended period of time, they start to realize the need for this kind of cross-border remittances because trying to get money out of the country can be quite an adventure. Just like going to the banks and standing in lines and they're looking at your passport, trying to figure out what it means. And, it's just a big ordeal. So I got into Bitcoin. It wasn't very effective for what I wanted to do. This is probably like 2015, because like the on-ramps, off-ramps weren't very mature at that time. But, it kind of stuck with me. And then in 2017, when the whole bull run started happening,
Yeah.
yeah, one of my friends, got me into it again. And then I just kind of dove down a rabbit hole, especially towards like the enterprise use cases, getting in through like a couple of projects here in China. One of note would be VeChain. I was a big part of their community. I started a website and I just did everything I could to get involved because I knew it was something I wanted to do. So I was doing a lot of volunteering and I was just like writing articles constantly. On like my own blog, started on Medium, and then it became my own website. And then that opened a lot of doors because the team just started, this happens a lot in blockchain, right? Because there's a lot of like open source culture, decentralized culture. They'll bring you in, they'll see your value, and then 4 years later, here we are. So it's been a very fast transformation. And I feel like that's one of the great things about this industry is, it's very meritocracy type thing.
Mhm.
If you can add value somewhere, you're going to be able to do that. So that's kind of my story with crypto. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Not the most thrilling thing in the world, but yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool that you like started writing articles and whatnot. And I know you write for Cointelegraph as well. I think once a week you
Mhm,
post, and I feel like
mhm,
you share a lot of insights about China. So, you've lived in China
mhm,
for over a decade, and like how
mhm.
fluent is your Mandarin, and like how does the crypto scene differ from the East and the West?
Yeah, I mean, like Mandarin is such a tough language, so like I would never say like I'm 100% fluent. But I mean, I'm definitely to the point where I can sit in, and like handle myself pretty well. Um, I wouldn't want to be giving like speeches in Chinese and stuff because that can be a bit of a challenge. But yeah, sorry, what was the second part of the question? You kind of threw me off with asking about my
Oh,
Chinese. I
it's
get all
it's like
nervous.
how does the crypto scene differ from the
uh,
East to the West? Because I mean, you
oh,
said you
uh,
grew up in San
mhm,
Diego, so I'm sure you understand both
yeah.
cultures. So how does like I guess the average like average Westerner and the average like I guess Asian person, like how do their views on crypto
Hmm.
differ?
Okay, yeah, that's a very great question. I think mostly from an ideological standpoint, like a lot of the people I met in the West, well, including myself, are really drawn towards like the democratization of power, to things like Federal Reserve, printing money, like these kind of topics come up a lot, right?
Mhm.
Decentralization, how important it is. And then beyond that, there's a lot of interest to get very active in terms of like NFTs and DeFi and things you can do and touch, right? And people tend to follow, they have a lot of loyalty, I guess, towards projects, right? So you get in these communities and you'll see people that are, it's like almost like a sports team, right? There's a sense of belonging and it becomes a part of your identity and the project can represent that. Obviously for traders, it's different, but yeah, I think China, there's a lot more traders. And a part of that is information gaps. It's not as easy for someone, in China to get in touch. Well, obviously, like Twitter's blocked, Telegram's blocked, Discord's blocked,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's it's really hard to bridge that. And then there's the language barriers. And then I think there's also a cultural barrier too, like for people trying to fit in. So they view it more as like an investment. And so you'll see people like they were driving this Doge thing. There was a lot of that volume was coming from China, and then Shiba, like a lot of that was coming from China. Yeah, because it's just about finding investment, short term, making some money. If the project's really strong, they might be able to create a community, and some of them have.
Mm-hmm.
Like in 2017, it was really good at creating like loyal. And when they do, it's very powerful. Yeah, I think that's like the main difference. People are less concerned out here about getting to know the project founders and setting up like you're doing, like creating really good content, and then more about like what can this technology do to make me rich.
I see.
So,
Yeah, I mean, at first, I guess, but I guess like for most people, like crypto appeals because of, oh, I can make money from this. And then as you get deeper and deeper into like what it actually does, then I'm like, oh wow, I can totally see this being like the future of finance.
Yeah. What about yourself? I feel like you should talk about yourself as well, because I think a lot of people from the Wootrade community might watch this video and not be familiar with you. So it's a good chance to plug yourself a little bit.
Yeah. So I guess my background is I've always been into poker, and
Okay.
I first heard about Bitcoin through poker because online poker is illegal in the US, and the only way to deposit money into these websites was through Bitcoin because that's what like banks can't censor. Yeah. So I heard about Bitcoin, or I learned about it in 2015, and then I just like never really looked past it just because it was like really like suspicious, and was like, oh, like it's probably used for drug money. And then 2017 happened. I'm like, oh God, like should I buy this thing? I just didn't because I just wasn't comfortable with it. And then in 2018, 2019, I'm like, okay, thank God I didn't buy that scam. And then 2020 happened, and I was just like wondering why stocks rebounded so fast. I was like, what is going on? Then I like for the first time in my life, I just learned about money printing in the Federal Reserve, and I guess like how assets just go up in value, right? And then I just that was like when I first made my Bitcoin purchase in August of 2020, and I was like kind of a Bitcoin maxi at the time, just because I guess it went up to like it kept going up. So I'm like, oh, awesome, Bitcoin is great. And then at the beginning of the year, poker, I guess the online poker boom was going great in 2020, just because everyone was, I guess, staying at home. But 2021, online poker was slowing down, and that was like my main source of income. So I just had more time on my hands, and I just started learning about DeFi, I guess decentralized finance, and everything about crypto. And I stumbled upon Woo because I met someone that like was really passionate about your project, and I just started making videos. I was connected to you, and then I'm just like focused on educating people about DeFi, like how you can actually use DeFi to generate income, things like that, and I guess like why the tech matters. So that's how I learned about Woo, and that's like my background with crypto. So I'm really new. I have a pretty fresh brain, I guess, in terms of how I view these things. You said you were interested in crypto for a long time, but for me, it's like really new to me. I've been in crypto for less than 12 months.
Yeah, and I think on like everyone's pretty relatively new. Like when you look at other interests you might have, could take generations, a family history into like some sort of hobby. Crypto, everyone's like 5-10 year max, right? Most people are in it for 1 or 2 years, then they get rich and retire, and you never hear from them again. So that's the cycle's very very quick in crypto.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Wootrade real quick. So
Sure.
for those that may or may not know Wootrade, can you just briefly give like a summary of like what you do and like what your mission is?
Yeah, I guess like the motto is like to disrupt markets, empower the individuals. So there is a great deal of that. Like it's the markets are not very efficient in the cryptocurrency space because you have so many different exchanges, and they're in different regions, and like the price is different on all of them, and there's not really great liquidity from like an institutional standpoint where you could just go in and buy millions of dollars if you wanted to. I mean, there are institutional trading platforms that facilitate stuff like this, but in general, it's far from like the traditional markets in terms of efficiency. So like there's a quantitative trading firm that we started as, right? Proudest Research. Most people have heard that name because we're one of the biggest like market makers in the space. That was 2018, and as Chronos grew, there was like this huge demand for them to trade on a lot of the, especially what we call like tier 2 exchanges, which are smaller. because those are the ones who really need liquidity, which is basically buy orders and sell orders, so that when the user comes, they have like a full order book to kind of trade with. And that creates a good trading experience, and the user stays, and then you have more liquidity. And it's like this self-fulfilling cycle, right? But first, they need that market maker. And for a market maker, it's not a great proposition to go to these new exchanges because you're providing liquidity. So that's like a capital risk. There's like a custodial risk because you're putting it on the exchange. You've gone through this whole onboarding phase where you figure out how to connect, and you test your strategy on there. It's just it's a lot of work. And then if there's no traders at first, you're just wasting your time, right? So that was like Proudest wanted to say yes, but at the same time, it wasn't very efficient to keep saying yes over and over again. So the idea from traditional finance, there's things called dark pools, which kind of connect different exchanges, and they're like these big pools where institutions can trade, right? But there's also like privacy things with dark pools in traditional finance, because like if Elon Musk, well, he's a bad example because he probably does want to manipulate the market, but if he wants to make some big purchase, he doesn't want everybody to know he's purchasing, right? So he goes to a dark pool. We're not actually dark, because we have an order book, anyone can view it, right? So we're actually what we call like a lit pool. So it's a lot more transparent, but it's the same concept, right? And we're aggregating liquidity from different sources, best liquidity, and then that just translates to a better user experience. And the purpose of that, which I guess we should get to in terms of empowering the individual, is we go from a, subsidize retail, us, right, by charging or profit sharing between the market makers who are making money on every trade anyway, with the platform. And this is kind of a very complex issue. And I think there's a lot of trust issues with this because of things like front running and traditional finance. But it's really not that, nefarious or anything like that. It's basically just that market makers are able to make money on trades. Some of that is by setting a spread, right, where there's a difference between the bid, the buy, and the ask price. And also, the key thing here is toxic flow. Like when you have two market makers and they're both trying to earn money on a very, very short time frame, they tend to push against each other, and nobody's profitable, right? And then when if retail's trading its retail, it's not a very good experience because retailers don't tend to make really close spreads, right? Because they're thinking, well, I'll just put a bid price down here and then someone else puts something. It's not a very good experience. So what you want is market makers trading with retail. That's the ideal profitability scenario for both people, because the retailer gets the good price and then the market maker is able to make money.
So that's like Robinhood works, right? Kind of.
Yes, kind of. Yes, that's essentially the idea, except for there's some concerns about how the companies behind Robinhood, like Citadel, are making money, right? Because there's some information asymmetry with that, where not everyone knows what Citadel's doing. But then that goes back to what we do is like there's an order book. You can see kind of where the orders, you put your order in, you see where it lands, you can see if people are front running. Nobody, that's not the key business model for Wootrade. It's just a very simple profit sharing solution, right? And that's great because the market makers trading as retail, they'll make some profit. They also get rebates from other venues where they trade because, it's kind of complex. But when someone like Proudest, they have a contract with another exchange, right? They have to trade a certain amount. And in order to trade a certain amount, they also have to hedge a certain amount because they don't want exposure to all these assets. So they need a low-cost place to hedge. So then Wootrade becomes a low-cost place for them to hedge. And it makes them even more money because they're making money on other platforms and then they're hedging the risk on Wootrade. So then they just share this profit with Wootrade, and then Wootrade shares that with the users, right? And so you create this win-win-win situation for everybody. And that's the basic idea there. And that's the mission, was to give people better markets, share this kind of profitability around. So it's not, obviously the exchanges are making a ton of money.
Yeah.
If you look at, right, we're trying to share that around a little bit more. And then we're also trying to do some of these trading strategies that are more institutional, allow these people to kind of accumulate wealth that normal people like us would never even have access to, right? So then we're trying to make that more accessible too. So that's kind of like the second part. So the first part is create efficient markets. The second part is to make these institutional wealth accumulation trading strategies or investment strategies available to the public. And so that's the whole empower the individual idea.
Yeah, and that's the concept of WooX as well, right? Right now, WooX is only right now it's in beta, but I believe in the next couple of weeks you're going to expand the WooX. You're going to open invitations to more people. And when can we expect WooX to launch to the public? Because I mean, I have like I saw WooX and it's great. I mean, the fees are really low. The user interface is like beautiful. So when can we expect to see that?
Okay, well, WooX is like one product built on the network. So I mentioned before, like the goal was to connect a bunch of these tier 2 exchanges. That's probably the original use, was to be like an institutional liquidity provider. But then once we have this network, why not let other people trade on it? So we built this interface, WooX, so that people can also trade with zero fees. So that's really the attraction, right? We're probably the only place you can trade with like zero maker, zero taker. If you stake, it's something like $150 worth of Woo tokens right now, which you also earn yield on. So when will people get on? I think we're looking at the end of July is when we're supposed to open it up more. Yeah, that's probably the best answer there. A month from now.
Yeah, sounds good. And when I first talked to you, I think a few months ago, or like when I first did my research on Wootrade, I just saw like the entire crypto markets being roughly $1.5 trillion, but there's more than like 200 exchanges. Like this fragmented liquidity problem is a huge issue. And during the call a few months ago, you said that the ultimate goal is to reach $1 billion in daily volume. So how are you tracking on that? And given the rapid growth, is it possible to see upside to your targets?
Well, I mean, our high has already been like 600 million. And then, yeah, I think we're now where it's like, it really depends on the volatility in the markets. So like when the price is going up and down, like traders are dumping and then they're buying, and you know, there's a lot of volume that comes in those days. So that's something you can't really control, right? If the markets get crazy volatile over the next month, we could hit it, you know, next month. If things die down, it could take, you know, like we have like a long bear market where trading, but yeah, it doesn't matter. I think the key thing is like we're looking for way higher than 1 billion. I think we're upping that internally to 10 billion is like the goal we want to hit by the end of the year. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, and I think it's quite possible if we see a lot of trading on WooX, and then if we see, you know, 1 or 2 more big clients on the B2B side, right? And then DeFi volume as well, right? So those are the 3 areas: the DeFi, the institutional, and the retail that we're shooting at. And I don't think that it is that difficult, because when you look at somebody like Proudest, I mean, by themselves, they trade that in a day. So, you know, you just really need 1 or 2 big clients and then a lot of retail clients. That's that. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge, I mean, yeah, I feel like, yeah, a few months ago, the Woo network was doing less than $100 million in volume a day. And now I mean, I guess with the recent volatility, this volume is a lot higher. And you just mentioned the $10 billion daily. That's a huge upside surprise, I guess, in a good way, obviously. So yeah, can you help my audience understand, I guess, the business model of Woo? So if you do hit the $10 billion daily volume, like how much revenue can you generate from that, if you're willing to share?
Okay, this is a really tough question to answer, because I mean, the profitability, a lot of it comes from like the profit sharing, which is kind of a factor of what we call like the toxic and the non-toxic flow, right? So some clients who are really good at trading and perhaps very toxic because they're very similar to like Proudest or the market maker on Wootrade, our profitability will be very low in that case. But volumes could be very high, right? And then sometimes some of our like institutional clients, they're more trading on different horizons. You know, they're not really interested in these very, very short time horizons. The profitability can be very high on very low volume. So like this month in particular, we've seen low volumes and relatively low profitability. Hasn't been a great month for anybody in the industry. Still 10 days, anything could happen. I guess there's less now. I guess there's like a week. But yeah, it's really hard for us right now to determine where we will be. In DeFi, we're actually very profitable. I'm not sure. Well, I guess people in DeFi, they're not really aggressively trading as much. It's just more like swaps, right? So swaps tend to be
Yeah.
much higher profitability. Yeah. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, and it's really hard for us to give an answer. And we wish we could. We wish we could be like, yeah, if we hit 10 billion, then we're going to be making 5 billion a month and just burning that. But it's not. It's not quite such a simple, answer.
Yeah, got it.
And
Yeah.
I hope
You
that
mentioned
helps.
that
Mhm.
profitability for decentralized exchanges is pretty high. And I'm assuming right now it's mostly on
Mhm.
layer one. So I'm assuming that in the
Mhm.
future, as Ethereum scales, most trading is going to happen on layer two. Do you see Woo like tapping into the liquidity on various layer twos? Like I know Uniswap is going on Arbitrum. So like in 1inch and like all those
Mhm.
dexes as well. So do
Mhm.
you have plans to, I guess, tap into layer two liquidity?
I think one of the layer two's biggest problems right now is liquidity, and on ramp, off ramps, right? Bridges, getting people on there, right? Because once they're on there,
Mhm.
it's a really good trading experience. But getting there is kind of a pain in the ass because you have to figure out how to do it. The technology doesn't always work, um, right? There's trust issues, right? Anytime you're depositing to a new network. So, for someone like us, it's a good fit. And the problem is, it's a lot like the centralized problem was like in 2018 when I mentioned there's so many and they all want us to go there, and then it becomes like a custodial issue again and a resource issues, especially if there's not a lot of volume at the beginning. So we're trying to find people who we trust, we have good synergy with. We believe there's already existing users in volume. Like these are some of the key, things that we're looking for. And when we find that, then yeah, like we're very keen to support. And we've started with BSC because, well, they have a lot of users in volume, as well as, from the Chrono side, we're quite close with, the Binance team. So
Mhm.
we want to support that, obviously, and I think our community wants us to support that too. And then also Solana, like we're quite close with Solana. The Serum guys, anyway, the Serum and Radiant and these teams. um, Polygon, we've recently gotten very close with them. We like what they're doing. um, and then Arbitrum, obviously everyone's looking at Arbitrum now as like it's too much momentum to kind of pass up on. So we're also looking at that. So I would say those are the four layer twos we're looking to aggressively target. But then this changes in a heartbeat. Something could come out of nowhere. Yeah,
Yeah, I
it
see.
makes sense
That's
though. It's
good
a
to
good
hear.
fit.
Yeah. Yeah. All
Hmm.
right. So
Hmm.
I want to pivot the conversation to more, I guess, Asia and China and crypto,
Sure.
because as an American, I mean, whenever I'm on Twitter and something like some bad news about China comes out, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that's just China FUD. Don't worry about it." And you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier that like Twitter's banned in China. I didn't even I didn't even
Hmm.
really know that, right? I mean, I'm just like that
Hmm.
ignorant, I guess, as an American. So, so it's like there's been a lot of bad news recently in terms of, I guess, like the miners being kicked out, etc. So, like, would you consider the most recent news like FUD, or are they like more real problems that like us Westerners should pay attention to?
Yeah, yeah. This is a great point because I think if you're on the outside and you're trying to figure out China, it's just a complete impossibility,
Yeah.
right, to figure out what's actually going on. So there's a lot of complexities to this, and I would say that for the miners, this is a bit of an issue, right? Because China is very keen on having a carbon neutral footprint because that's part of the image they're trying to protect to the world. For a long time, everyone kind of viewed China as like this industrial pollutant, bad air quality, right? So they're trying to change that. And then obviously the low hanging fruit are these kind of like industrial areas that don't add a lot to the actual economy. So like Bitcoin miners, they're making tons of money, but it's not being reflected in jobs and economic stimulus. So that's probably this is we're seeing it now. They're all shutting down, they're leaving. What will the effect be? Might not be much because I've seen a lot of Western people talking about, oh, this is great, it'll be more decentralized now, but I think a lot of the miners is just simply moving across borders like Kazakhstan or maybe like Pakistan or even the US, but they're still going to be controlled by the same management. So that might be like not as positive as people think. But I think in terms of leaving China, it's a positive because then there's always this fear, right? Like, what if China cracks down on miners? Well, they did. Now it's done, right? That's not hanging over us anymore. It's we can stop worrying about that. Um, on the more like a cryptocurrency side, um,
Mhm.
China is all for things that, add value to the real economy, especially through technology. So we have things like AI, big data, 5G, and blockchain, right? These are things that China's taking the lead on, and they're doing very well with it. And a lot of that is because the government, the strong national government, having a top-down policy, which includes academic researchers, it includes state-owned enterprises like telecom companies and things like that. And then private sector, which includes things like Alibaba, Huawei, Tencent, right? These kind of guys, they're all working together on a lot of these initiatives, and it pays dividends. And you look at, like, there's a lot of distrust from the Western side about
Definitely.
like, oh, the government's involved. But where did this model come from? This model came from the US, right? I mean, like back in the space race, like NASA, it was like a top-down national policy, and it was very effective, right? It got us on the moon. We the US controlled the whole space race. So that's where, like, it's not as scary, I think, as people let on. And it works, right? And right now in the West, we're not really focused on that as much. Like, we're more focused on social issues, like things like guns and abortion, and these topics that are important. They're very important for society, but they might not be best for pushing forward technology, right? So yeah, that's kind of a tangent, but that's kind of how I view the difference between what's going on in China and what's going on in the US. And from a digital currency standpoint, like, China wants a very strong digital yuan, because that will offset what everyone's been trying to do, has been offset the dollar's dominance, right? Because it's a powerful thing for a geopolitical standpoint. I mean, that's not the key. That's not the only thing they're trying to do, right? But they're trying to, make their own economy more valuable, their own currency valuable. And generally speaking, Bitcoin is not really a threat to that. But when the wild bull markets are happening, it's very hard. Like the top layer of people who are exposed to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and new technology and innovating and building, it starts to leak into the middle class and the lower class sector, right? And then that's when you have people putting their entire life savings into Dogecoin,
and Shiba.
and then when that happens, Shiba, yeah. What happens when that eventually goes south, right? Then you have instability in society. You have people jumping out of windows. You have people going to the police and demanding, like, this is not something that China wants anything to do with. So stability is kind of the key, right? And so what they tend to do is they have these brief periods where they will crack down on things, the crackdown. And that's very, it's a top-down crackdown, which means national government leads it, and then everybody underneath it has to fall in line. How much they fall in line, that's the key thing. So we heard about the banks recently. Like some of the biggest banks said they will not facilitate these payments. And that's a big worry. Like, if you're me and you have cryptocurrency and you want to get back to, yuan, right, at some point, I'm not a good example, but maybe a local Chinese person would have this concern, right? Like, will I be able to get back? But for the bank, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do this long term, because they don't want to lose users to other banks, right? And they don't want to lose to, especially like these digital apps right now. Everyone's just using Alipay. No one's using the bank anymore. So how far will they go? Like, the banks go to uphold these? Is this just like, oh, we make an announcement, we're following the national policy, everybody sees it, great, right? And then after a month, it kind of goes back to normal. This has been the norm in the past, right? We have crackdowns, and then it kind of loosens up, and then the instability dies down, everybody's happy, and then we can get away with it again for another set period of time, right? So these are the cycles. We see it again and again in China. Yeah, I guess that might answer.
Yeah, because I guess from the Western side, like I guess the American side, we just see the headlines of like, oh, China's doing this, and I guess the West doesn't have like a great view on the Chinese government. And for, like, in the most recent news I've heard was that Baidu, China's Google, right, restricted searches for crypto exchanges like Binance, Huobi, etc. And do you think the government had a hand in this as well? And like, what do you mean? What do you think the implications are? Is it just because like, I guess the Chinese government didn't want, I guess China their citizens to trade Doge and stuff, or is there like a bigger implication here?
Yeah. Obviously all these tech companies, they work very closely with the government. in certain, like they have some oversight, right? It's not like, well, I guess in the West, like they're trying to drag Zuckerberg into Congress, but there's a lot of pushback in the Western companies towards big government. And I think mostly that's because it's good for the consumer view of the company, right? If they're not working with the government, users are more likely to use it. I think in China, there is not that distinction, and you have to play by the rules. So they do, right? Like companies will have a party officer within the company. And that party officer's job will be to kind of dictate how this national policy should be affecting their own company. And then he will advise or, tell them what to do. So again, you have this whole thing, like Baidu is a private company. They don't want to do things that make people stop using them. They're kind of caught in this tug of war between like the government. They have to comply, but they don't want to comply to the point where users hate them. So it's like, okay, you don't want us to search for cryptocurrencies, we'll ban the word Binance, but you could actually still search for the word Binance app download and it would go right to the download page. So it's a very superficial kind of compliance. Mm-hmm. And I think that's enough. I think that's enough for the to keep the general public from going all in on Dogecoin. That's all they need. And I think in the West we're so terrified of the word government crackdown, probably for good reason. Definitely. So when we hear the word like China is cracking down on this, like we start to panic. And maybe we should, but that's a philosophical issue that we could go to some other time. I think for people here, they kind of know, okay, this means we need to follow the rules, especially well for the next short period of time, right? That's kind of what it means. It doesn't mean we're all going to get thrown in jail and beaten and our life savings stripped of us if we break the rules. It's just like, hey, get back in line, kind of a thing. So
and it seems like you mentioned earlier that I guess the Chinese government doesn't really see Bitcoin as a threat to the yuan. It's more of like a speculative asset, or it's Bitcoin, right, as a speculative asset. And I know Jerome Powell also said, Bitcoin. I think he said the word stores are value, right, in an interview, and he didn't really see a threat to replacing the dollar and whatnot. So to me personally, I think this is more bullish for Bitcoin just because the government doesn't really see it as a threat. It's like, okay, it might replace gold, or people might speculate on it. So do you also interpret it in this way, or do you believe that either the US or the Chinese government, like are they going to crack down on Bitcoin more?
Really hard to say on the US side. I don't think they're big fans of it there. And when you're in the pole position, the leading position, you're able to do things differently from other countries. I think China particularly does not want their citizens and private companies to fall behind. So if there is some kind of revolutionary technology, they want to be there. They classified digital assets like Bitcoin as property, which was an interesting ruling, which it's not illegal to own it. It's like illegal to trade it, but not really. It's not very clear in this respect. Like what is legal? Like how do you get it? How do you own it as property if you didn't buy it, right? So that part. They don't want capital flight. They don't want people putting their funds that they may have obtained illegally into Bitcoin and then having it go to somewhere like Singapore, Hong Kong, or somewhere where then they can escape, because they've had a lot of problems with that in the past, where top scientific researchers or government officials, they did something corrupt. Land developers, they do something corrupt and then they take all their money out of the country. See you later, off to America to live in my mansion, right? So that's obviously something they don't want. And I think with Bitcoin, the industry is huge. Like, I think China is quite proud of exchanges like Huobi and OKEX. I guess originally like Binance. Some of the bigger crypto projects, the developers, the miners, right? I mean, this is all huge industry. The trading industry is huge. They don't want to lose that. They don't want them falling behind economically. But it's just a matter of, let's keep it contained to what I said, that kind of the top level who understand the risks and how to use it, and not have it leak into like the wild speculation range of, I'm going to put all my money into this crap and then 0 or 1 billion, the Suju method.
This is super cycle. Yeah. So the
Mhm.
last thing I'll touch on is you put out this tweet I think yesterday where you said
Mhm.
worried about China minor FUD. Pathetic. I've seen
Mhm.
stronger hands on a clock. So it sounds
Mhm.
like to me that you don't really or I guess the people reacting or I guess like the price action and people reacting negatively to the China news. You don't really see this as rational, and you're still like relatively. I mean you have to be bullish crypto, but uh, do you also like do you
Mhm.
consider like this FUD, I guess China FUD is overblown recently?
Yeah, absolutely. Because most of the like the exchanges, we'll talk about the exchanges because probably the most influential factor that are here
Mhm.
will be OKEX and then all this like Gate, Mex, whatever. All of them are registered abroad, right? Even though they've kind of have this reputation as being like China exchanges, they're all registered in like Singapore, Hong Kong. So the police don't have any authority over that. And then as long as they're not like too flagrantly, like a lot of them don't even service like Huobi, I think is blocked there. Futures trading for users in China, right? They're they're not really falling under the jurisdiction of the government anymore. So when the government announces these sort of policies, it doesn't even affect anything. The miners kind of got caught with their pants down on this one.
Mhm.
But as we're seeing now, they're moving out anyway. And so once that happens, they'll be the same as the exchanges, where the miners, maybe the people are here, the influential like people are here, but then the organizations are abroad, right? So next time we're going to see it again. It's always going to happen again when the market starts going up again, and people start investing, and then the government's going to say, "Hey, remember this technology? It's bad." Right? And then everyone's going to panic, but absolutely nobody is affected by this, really. I mean, um, small effects perhaps on how people do things like marketing and stuff like that, but it's just over and over we get this, and then it's just like on Twitter it just begins reduced to like China's banning Bitcoin. It's like, well, they've already done that, and then but it, like they're just reminding people that, right? And so it's that part's a little bit frustrating, but I guess it's just one of the fun quirks of being in this industry, the volatility.
Yeah. And people only read the headlines, right? So they just see China and
Yeah,
like banned,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh God, not again. And that
yeah.
there's like this
And so
meme of
many,
like every
yeah.
year, there's like China FUD 2011, China
Mhm,
FUD
mhm,
2012,
mhm.
and like
Yeah,
there's gonna
yeah,
be China
yeah,
FUD for the next 5 years. But in
yeah,
reality, it's
yeah,
just the government reminding, I guess, like yeah,
yeah.
things like that.
And there's so many levels of like government, and then like from like the different banks, the top banks, the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, and then down from that all the national banks, right? So each of them are going to have to make an announcement at some point, right, to fall in line with the policy, right? The government said it, so now the banks have to say it, and the big banks said it, so now the smaller banks have to say it. But like we just simplify everything in the West, like, oh, this big Chinese bank, it's like, yeah, I mean, we knew that was going to happen because that's already been, they were told that, right? So that part is more of like the funny but frustrating angle.
I see. All right. So thank you for sharing a lot about China. Like
Mm-hmm.
like I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
like I guess most Americans and like people in the West, they don't really know what's going on. So those insights are really,
Mm-hmm.
really helpful to me and to my audience. So
Mm-hmm.
let's like pivot more to questions about yourself. Because for me, like I mentioned, I'm pretty new to crypto and I'm trying to learn from smart individuals like you because I want to make it in crypto, right? I'm making a lot of content and whatnot. But the first question I have for you is like, what is your most proud achievement in crypto? You've been in the space for a long time. You've written a bunch of articles. You said you volunteered for VeChain. Now you're at Woo. Like, what would you say is
Mm-hmm.
like something that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I don't really have a great answer to this question because it's just been like one constant blur. And
Mhm.
there's like this industry is expanding so quickly that there's never like a you've made it state. Obviously, like during the bull runs, you feel a lot better because like financial gains. Obviously, like landing big jobs, like we're proud of that. I think I'm just proud of like kind of the industry as a whole for getting to this point. Like anytime you see something like the first time Elon Musk announced that they were buying Bitcoin, like that was a huge accomplishment,
Yeah.
for everybody, right? That was a victory for everybody who had been, I guess, evangelizing or shilling, I guess, these cryptocurrencies. Um, yeah, I think obviously the work that our team's done at Wootrade, going from a project nobody had ever heard of in, well, October when we launched the token, to now being so vocal that people are annoyed by us on Twitter. Um, that like that's something that, you know, it's always surprising to see. And obviously I can't take credit for all of that. But you know, that is something that I'm, you know, proud of the community, the people who are early, who stuck with it, and then so seeing a lot of them now who are, you know, doing really well. That's cool to see, right? Because that's something we all do together. I think that's the collective nature of crypto, is that everything is done, you know, together, and so we all reap the benefits.
Yeah, and I think you do a great job. I mean, the Medium articles are great. I feel like you're on Telegram 24/7. Every time someone asks a question, like Ben Yorke comes out of nowhere and just like answers it immediately. Yeah, and I remember when I was doing my research on Woo, because I remember I think in January there was a up only episode with Suzu, and I think he mentioned Woo, or like they mentioned Woo, and like the prices shot up, right? And after like people realized, oh, 3 arrows is in this. But as I was doing my research, I think there was it was announced, I think in November or something, that 3 arrows invested in Woo. So I'm like, wow, the markets are so, I guess, first of all, irrational and I guess inefficient. I'm like, wow, okay, so there's so much edge to be had. So yeah, I think it's like, you've done a great job so far, and yeah, like you've even started like the Wootopia, right? To I guess these community calls bi-monthly, which I think is great. The next question I have is like, I guess that we talked about like what you're most proud of, but what is your biggest regret in crypto? I'm just curious because I don't want to. I ask this to everyone, and I don't want to like make this same regrets as like everyone else.
Yeah, I think this really just depends on what you're in it for. Like obviously, like for the financial side, like you might regret not selling top, but for me, that's not really something that I worry too much about, because I have pretty strong conviction that the market over the next, well, we've seen it every 3 year cycle, you know, the higher highs and higher lows, right? So trying to time the market, like that's not very effective. So in terms of regrets, I don't really have any. I mean, I wish I'd gotten in sooner. I guess that's a regret. Like when 2015, when I first found it, I guess I wish I would have dove into it more then. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I have one. I think just the attitude I've always had was just like, if anyone asks you to do anything, just do it, right? Like if like, so I would be like traveling around to events. If anyone asks if you want to go to this event, just go. And then if anyone asks you to write an article on this project, you know, you just do it. And then that just you know, builds your network and builds everything, and then your knowledge. And then, you know, at the end of the day, you don't really have too many regrets with that sort of thing, unless on the financial side. But it's not really something that I'm interested in as much. So I guess I can't give you a very good answer to that question.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, it's like when I ask about the biggest regret, it's like, oh yeah, like I wish I didn't trade like this with this mean that way. But I feel like it sounds like to me like you're like really in it for the tech. when you first I guess, I mean, you like 2017 was like when your eyes opened up, but you said you like volunteered for VeChain and whatnot. So I guess if you're in this space for the long run, you just know that we're gonna just keep like growing like exponentially. So we don't have to worry about like, I guess, like the financial side, just because as long as we survive and as long as we're exposed and as long as we're constantly learning, then I mean the trajectory is up, right?
Yeah, I think someone made a tweet on like a big influencer made a tweet that said, "Don't beat yourself up." Like this was 2 days ago, and the market was dumping. Don't beat yourself up too much about this mistake. You're going to make it again in the future, right? So that's kind of like my attitude as well. Like the markets are going to go up and down, and you're going to sit there going, "Oh, when did they sell?" Right? But this is you can't think about that.
Yeah, and this is like my first ever like bull run or bull cycle. So I mean, I do have regrets, but I mean, for me, it's like you just got to learn from it. I guess my channel covers yield farming. I guess so. I guess near the top, I was like almost 100% exposed. But I guess in the future, I'm gonna just maybe do like an 80-20 portfolio of like 80% crypto volatile assets and 20%, I guess, stable coins, and just like generate yield that way. And I feel like no matter what happens, I'll have dry powder. I'll have powder to buy the dip, and I can sleep at night. Because I mean, bull markets can be exhausting, right? Because you wake up, you check the prices, and like your telegram's pumping off, and everyone's like, ah. So, yeah. So speaking of
yeah,
which,
I mean, any money that you lose, like that's just like tuition money. Like that's just how you got to view it. Like this is a lesson you learned, and you can't learn that lesson unless you lose the money. So
yeah. Yeah, speaking of this bull market, what has surprised you the most? I mean, outside of like Dogecoin, like going like berserk,
Mhm.
like is there like for example, like
Uh,
did you have a bull thesis that proved to be wrong, or did you have like a bear thesis that like proved to be right, something like that? Like what was your biggest surprise, and like what did you learn from it?
I think the biggest surprise was how similar this bull run was to the last one. And we thought at the last one, like, oh, we're going to be so much more mature. We'll have institutions coming in, all this, And we did have institutions coming in. But even with the institutions, we still had the Doge things. So like that's not a surprise. I mean, that happened in 2017, the same thing. You had things like Ripple going to like $4, just crazy stuff where you would wake up and you go like, there's no way that's going to make money. And then I'm not buying that shit. And then it just keeps going up and up and up. And like you had things like Titcoin and Spankcoin. That was that cycle's version of, like Cummies and stuff like that, right? You had so many similarities between 2017 and 2018. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. In a bull market, everything goes up, and in a bear market, everything goes down, right? And so I guess the good projects with good fundamentals tend to go up more and go down less. But yeah, you can't beat yourself up over the markets because it's inevitable that there's going to be irrationality. And yeah, that's yeah. So I guess that would be okay. Yeah, I guess that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, I remember like I was doing so much fundamental research on like all these coins that I'm like putting money into, and then like I'm just outperformed by like Ass Coin and Poo Coin. Like God, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what is going on? And there's like this whole
Mm-hmm.
the productive assets meme, right? It's like DeFi generating cash flow. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
these have to outperform, and then I mean, it's the same as
Mm-hmm.
2017. It's the memes that just go up,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of the retail money, people thought that would go into like DeFi, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not going to DeFi, it's going to these meme coins, and like Coinbase feeling the pressure is like listing Shiba, listing Doge. And I think that also like takes away, I guess, the appeal of like DeFi. But I mean, once you start using DeFi and like once you start learning about all these crypto projects, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what the future is at,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure
But
over time the market will be more,
mhm.
I guess, quote unquote smart, right?
I mean, yeah, but that changes because like I think in 2017, I remember having a conversation, maybe it was 2018, where like the token that you should be buying in 2018 was BNB, right? And it felt like that because everyone was going to Binance. There was real utility there. They had explosive growth. And maybe at the time it didn't go up as much as, some meme coin might have, like obviously like maybe Ripple without having very much actual usage. I might get, roasted for saying that. Um, at the time it might have felt like this is a better bet. But then when you look at how it performed over the entire bear cycle, and then obviously in the bull cycle now, it's way higher than it was back then. You're still better off finding the fundamental projects with good use cases, and then sticking to that as like your bull thesis for sure. So yeah, like don't you can't be too distracted by the noise because it will have its day. Every dog has its day, but the good tokens will outperform, the bad ones.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of which, like you mentioned, like 2018, you
Mm-hmm.
should have bought BNB just because I mean made sense, right? I mean, great exchange.
Mm-hmm.
I think Binance has like the highest volume out of all exchanges, and it makes sense for
Yes.
BNB to do well. I don't think anyone really saw Binance Smart Chain coming. That was like
Mm-hmm.
the explosive growth that they needed for I guess for
Mm-hmm.
the token price of BNB. But in terms of
Mm-hmm.
I guess like how do I find the 2018 BNB? Like what do you think is like the trend that crypto is going to go through in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, that I guess I should look into? Like what kind of sectors, and like what kind of tokens do you think will, I guess, outperform the Bitcoin and like just the average coin?
Well, I think Wootrade.
Of course.
I mean that's the obvious answer. Like we think we are on the verge of something really groundbreaking in terms of there's a lot of copying in the crypto space. There's not a lot of innovation, especially in a bull market. People tend to copy for like quick cash grabs, but like what Wootrade is doing has the potential to change how exchanges and trading happens. Outside of that, I will go back to DeFi, and you mentioned earlier that DeFi protocols are not going up, like the money isn't flowing into them. It definitely will, right? And it definitely is going to come. Like if you look at a protocol like Aave, they're going to get, they're like, it's a very safe bet, right? Because they've done a lot of work. They've got like a banking license, and institutions, from our conversations we're having, everybody is trying to get into the space, and they're trying to get in a way that their risk tolerance from like a corporation or from a personal level can tolerate. And you know, protocols like Aave and Compound, like these are ones that have been battle tested for years, right? They're the ones that are going to get a lot of the benefit from that. And then like Uniswap could as well, like these kind of really big DeFi protocols. So you talked about, you know, the 80-20 split with things like that. I mean, yeah, these big DeFi protocols are a lot more lower on the risk scale, just because they will have users after this. And we have no idea what it would look like if banks start putting money into it, if like sovereign wealth managers start putting money in that, if like pension funds start putting money into that. It's going to drive the TVLs way up, which will create, it will have some like effects on the like the APYs you can earn, because like it'll be way oversupplied, but it's going to completely change the way you know, people view these products. I believe that DeFi will really disrupt a lot of the financial sector, you know, more so than it has now. Like we think it has now, but it will be much more. So yeah, that's not a bad bet to get into, in my opinion, which isn't always right. But yeah,
yeah, I share the same bullishness for Aave. I mean, just I mean, I make a lot of videos on the Polygon ecosystem, and Aave is, I mean, by far the most the protocol with the highest TVL. And like you mentioned, they have the banking license. And Stani Kuleshov, who is the founder, he like tweeted out that, you know, like they literally have institutions like testing on Aave, like they have an API for private institutions. Yeah, and like, so I'm sure like a lot more protocol, a lot more money will flow into Aave. And Aave is like a bank, right? At the end of the day, it's like a bank where you can actually earn yield. And I think one day Aave is going to release like a debit card or credit card, and I think that's going to be crazy.
Yeah, sorry, it's going to get to the point where, oh yeah, I think it's going to get to the point where every like DeFi protocol, actually, it's not something I said, it was something Rand said, but every DeFi protocol is going to want to be a bank, and then every bank is going to want to be a DeFi protocol. So because they want these two things will somewhat merge. So yeah, that's definitely something. I think the protocol layers, you talked about Polygon. I think the ones that succeed stand to grab a lot of value from this. For example, if like Aave is massively successful and Polygon is the network they choose to be particularly massively successful on, then Polygon will absorb a lot of that value, right? But if it's something, for example, that you know, just some random layer 2, technology is great, community is great, super hype, but for whatever reason, it just can't get it over the line, right? Then, I mean, that stands to lose a lot of value, right? So I feel like the DeFi protocols are kind of interesting in that they're flexible, right? They can kind of move from Arbitrum to layer 1 to Solana, BSC. Well, they can move wherever they want to capture the users, the volume, right? Which is what we're doing, right? We're trying to stay very flexible. And so you have a bit of a hedge against the technology risk, but you know, like the really big winners might be the layer 2s that succeed, or the layer 1s that succeed.
Yeah, and
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and as BNB, like the Matic token has shown, like even if the transaction fees are super low, like the value accrues to the token, right? Just because there's more utility for the native token on the native chain. And one of the last questions I want to ask you is like, what are your views on governance tokens? Because this is also like one of the memes, right, that people talk about. It's like, yeah, like Uniswap is generating this much revenue, but Uni is a governance token, and like same can be said for many other many other protocols. So like, do you see like can you see a world where like protocols can be doing so good, but the governance tokens just don't really accrue value just because there's just governance tokens, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, they got to get the model down right, and then it's incentivizing the users to behave in a way that, you know, is beneficial to the protocol as a whole and not just themselves. and then also to stay motivated and to actually vote, right? We're seeing a lot of these issues happening in governance where people are, acting for themselves, or they're not acting at all because they don't give a shit, right? So finding a structure that works. I don't think we found it yet, or if we found it, it hasn't expanded to the point where we see, okay, this is the model that we should all be using. But from a big picture, when you step back and you look at how ownership of private companies exists and things like that, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, raising funds has never been easier than with these digital assets, and a lot of that has to tie into governance, because that was always the knock in 2017. You're just buying air. It's not. It's like a stock where you have dividends, voting rights. Like you get nothing, right? But as we improve that model, then you get that, and it's a much more robust model. So I think it might not happen from this current crop of protocols, but eventually someone will get it right, and then we will see governance suddenly become more commonplace, right? And that's something we're trying to do with the Woo token. We're trying to figure out, what do we decentralize, and then after we decentralize, how do we make sure that people stay active and engaged, and have some value from participating in the ecosystem. So these are all questions we're looking at now, and it's not an easy answer. But even if you look at like voting in the U.S., like what a mess that is, right? The voting rates are not very high. People don't really educate themselves about the issues, and then you tend to get people voting for factions rather than voting for policies that they believe in. So this isn't like this is a blockchain issue. This is like a society issue that we have to kind of look at.
Yeah, and you mentioned decentralization. And I guess like my view is that not everything has to be decentralized, and like not, I mean, depending on the protocol, I mean, depending on the company, I mean, McDonald's should not be decentralized, right? But so what are your views on like how what is like the sweet spot in terms of decentralization? Like I guess for Woo, I mean, maybe not even for Woo, just like for protocols in general, do you believe in like what's best for protocols is like 100% decentralization, where a bunch of people around the world own these governance tokens and people get to vote? Or do you think some centralization is needed in order for these protocols to succeed?
Yeah, I think at the beginning you do need some sort of centralization, or at least some kind of governing body to kind of jumpstart and bootstrap the ecosystem. But like even at Wootrade, we're talking about now, like, how can we make the token holders capture all of the value, right? It shouldn't be like the company keeps 50 and then the token holders get 50, right? So this is something we're working towards. We want it to be where that, and then once you do that, then you fall into this completely different like legal regulatory bracket, because you're no longer a security token, right? There's no company, so there can't be security, right? It's just a DAO, and then it's decentralized. And I think that's important, but you still have issues here, obviously, with like with any sort of like proof of stake model. One person can buy up an extreme amount of control, and then they become like the 51%. You cannot vote them out, right? So that's a problem, and that's why you kind of need to manage it until your community gets to the point where Bitcoin is now, where 51% attacks are like, we think they're almost impossible, right? So you do need to kind of get to that phase before you can completely decentralize.
Yeah, it seems like, I guess, talking about markets here, it seems like a lot of, I guess my view is that crypto just needs more time to mature. We're still figuring things out. Experimentation is everywhere. And I guess maybe one of the reasons for the crash, or maybe like I don't know if the crash is the right word, but we're just, the markets were too heated.
The crashes, there's lots of them.
Yeah. So I know you have a meeting soon, so I just want to thank you for your time. This was a great conversation. Learned a lot about Woo, I guess more about China, Asia. But do you have any lasting words for my audience about anything that you want to share?
I mean, not really. I mean, obviously, people who are listening to your channel are people who are already like looking for good content, and not chasing the hype people on YouTube, right? So I think they're doing a good job there. And it's just kind of like, obviously, if you're like in the Wootrade community, like we definitely want people who are like your audience, who are looking for more knowledge, who want to be engaged. And that's exactly the kind of people we're looking for to kind of, work with, unite with, and build this ecosystem. So it's been a great conversation as always. Like, I don't even have to prep for these sort of things because me and you just kind of have this natural sort of flow to it. So let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for your time. I'm sure, I mean, it's 7 p.m. here, but it's 10 a.m. there, so you have a long day ahead. So yeah, thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah.